My name is Caleb Vance, and this happened in western North Carolina, not far from the Appalachian Mountains. I was 29 at the time, recently divorced, burned out from work, and barely sleeping more than a few hours a night. After months of noise, court dates, and sitting in an empty apartment that no longer felt like mine, I decided to disappear somewhere quiet for a while. I found a small cabin rental online outside a place called Black Hollow. The photos showed thick woods, rolling hills, and a porch facing nothing but trees. It looked peaceful in a way that almost didn't seem real. The owner only emailed me once with directions and a keypad code. No small talk, no warnings, nothing unusual. The drive took nearly 6 hours from Charlotte. Once I left the highway, the roads narrowed into steep mountain curves lined with dense forest. Cell service faded fast. By the time I reached the last gas station before the mountain road, my GPS had already frozen twice. I stopped to grab snacks, bottled water, and firewood. The woman behind the register watched me in a way that felt less friendly and more curious. When I mentioned the cabin near Black Hollow, she paused for a second too long before asking whose property it was. I told her the owner's name. She nodded slowly, but didn't respond right away. Finally, she said, "People don't stay up there long." I assumed she meant the isolation or bad reception. I joked about needing peace and quiet. She didn't smile. She just handed me my receipt and told me to be careful driving after dark because deer cross those roads without warning. That should have been a normal conversation, but something about her tone stayed with me. It sounded less like advice and more like concern. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by thick woods on every side. It looked older than the photos showed. The porch sagged slightly, and moss covered parts of the roof. The clearing around it was bigger than I expected, but beyond that open space was nothing but trees packed tightly together. The silence stood out immediately. No traffic, no distant barking dogs, not even airplane noise overhead, just wind moving through leaves. Inside, the place was simple but clean. A couch, fireplace, small kitchen, and one bedroom with a window facing the backwoods. I unpacked, made coffee, and sat outside as the sky darkened. At sunset, fog drifted between the trees, thick enough to blur the edges of the forest. Once darkness settled, the tree line looked solid black, like a wall surrounding the cabin. I went inside and locked the door without thinking much about it. Around 10 that night, while reading on the couch, I heard a single knock from somewhere outside. It didn't sound close enough to be the front porch, more like wood hitting wood deeper in the trees. I ignored it at first, assuming a branch had fallen. Then it came again, slow, hollow, spaced far enough apart that it sounded deliberate. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing followed. Eventually I went to bed, though I couldn't fully relax. The bedroom window had no curtains, and the dark woods sat only a few yards away. I lay there, staring at the glass, half asleep, until sometime after midnight when I woke suddenly for no clear reason. The room felt different, too quiet. I looked toward the window and saw a shape near the tree line, tall, motionless. At first I thought it was part of a tree trunk, but something about its outline looked wrong. Human-shaped, watching the cabin. I sat upright, trying to focus. Then clouds shifted overhead. Moonlight brightened the clearing, and the figure was gone. I got out of bed and stepped closer to the window. Nothing was there, just empty woods. I stood listening, my heart pounding harder than it should have. Then I heard slow movement behind the cabin, leaves crunching, footsteps, not fast, not sneaking, just pacing calmly along the back wall beneath the bedroom window. The sound stopped directly below me. I didn't move again for the rest of the night. The next morning, sunlight made everything feel less threatening, at least for a little while. The woods looked ordinary again. Birds moved through branches, fog lifted slowly from the ground, and the fear I'd felt during the night started to sound unreasonable in my own head. I walked around the cabin with a cup of coffee, trying to convince myself I'd overreacted. That lasted until I reached the back wall beneath the bedroom window. The leaves there looked pressed down in a wide patch, like someone had stood in the same spot for a long time. Near the foundation, deep in soft mud left from old rain, was a footprint, bare, human-shaped, larger than mine by several inches. The impression was clear enough to show individual toes. It didn't look old either. I crouched beside it longer than I should have, trying to explain it logically. Maybe a hunter had crossed through the property. Maybe someone local wandered the woods barefoot. Neither explanation felt believable. The clearing sat too far from any road, and there were no tire tracks besides mine. I spent most of the morning pacing between the porch and tree line, trying to decide whether to leave. But I'd already driven so far, and part of me didn't want to admit that a single strange night had scared me off. By afternoon, curiosity outweighed fear. Behind the cabin, past the patch of flattened leaves, I noticed a narrow trail disappearing into the trees. It looked old and barely used, partly hidden beneath roots and overgrowth. I grabbed a flashlight and followed it, telling myself I only planned to walk a short distance. The deeper I went, the more the woods changed. The air felt cooler under the thick canopy, and the silence became noticeable in a way that made me aware of every sound my body made. My breathing sounded too loud. Dry leaves cracked sharply beneath my shoes. After 10 minutes, I started seeing marks carved into trees along the path. 3 long vertical scratches cut close together. At first I thought hikers marked the trail, but these weren't painted symbols or trail signs. They looked gouged into bark with force. Some were fresh, exposing pale wood beneath. Others had darkened with age. The farther I walked, the more often I saw them. Eventually, the trail opened into a small clearing. In the center sat an old stone foundation covered in moss, the remains of what looked like a long, collapsed cabin. Pieces of rotten lumber lay scattered nearby. The place felt forgotten, untouched for decades. Hanging from a low branch above the foundation was a small child's shoe, swinging slightly in the breeze. The leather looked cracked and stiff with age. I felt an immediate urge to leave. Then I heard movement somewhere beyond the clearing. A quick rustle, something shifting through brush. I turned toward the sound and caught movement between trees, too large to be a raccoon and too upright to be a deer. I stood completely still, waiting for another sound, but everything went quiet again. As I backed away from the ruins, I noticed more prints in damp soil near the stones. Bare footprints, the same large shape as the one near the cabin. They led away from the clearing into thicker woods. I followed them with my eyes until they vanished beneath dead leaves. The walk back felt different. I kept glancing over my shoulder, sure I could hear something matching my pace just beyond sight. Every time I stopped, the woods stopped too. When the cabin finally came back into view through the trees, relief hit me harder than expected. But for the first time since arriving, the cabin didn't feel like a retreat anymore. It felt like a place sitting in the middle of someone else's territory. That evening, I kept replaying the trail in my head. The shoe hanging from the branch bothered me more than anything else. It wasn't just strange, it felt personal, like something intentionally left behind. I locked the cabin earlier than the night before and stayed inside, trying to distract myself with a downloaded movie. Outside, darkness settled quickly over the clearing. Around 10, I heard movement again. Not distant this time, leaves shifting near the side of the cabin, slow footsteps crossing gravel. I muted the television immediately. The sound stopped for several seconds, then resumed near the back wall. A scraping noise dragged across wood, slow enough that I could follow it, traveling along the exterior siding. I grabbed the fireplace poker and stood near the kitchen doorway, listening. The scraping ended near the bedroom side of the cabin. Then came 3 deliberate knocks against the wall. Not loud, controlled. I waited for more, but silence followed. I barely slept. The next morning I drove down the mountain under the excuse of needing groceries, though really I needed to be around people. The same gas station sat quiet beside the road. The woman behind the counter recognized me immediately. She studied my face before asking if I was staying at the cabin alone. I told her yes. I hesitated, then mentioned the footprints and the old ruins in the woods. For the first time, her expression changed. She glanced toward the windows as if checking who might be outside. She asked if I'd gone past the clearing behind the cabin. I told her I hadn't gone much farther than the stone foundation. She nodded slowly and lowered her voice. She said that area used to hold a small settlement decades ago, before a fire destroyed most of it. According to her, a family disappeared there sometime in the 1940s. Husband, wife, 2 kids. Search parties looked for weeks but never found bodies. She explained it casually, almost like repeating a local story she'd told before. When I asked if people believed someone killed them, she shrugged and said, "Mountain towns always created stories to explain things they didn't understand." But before I left, she stepped outside and stopped me beside my car. She said, "Don't stay out after dark up there." I asked why. She looked toward the mountains and said, "Some things notice routines." That sentence stayed with me the entire drive back. I reached the cabin before sunset and immediately noticed something wrong. The front porch railing had changed. Hanging from one of the wooden posts was a small animal skull tied with old string. It faced directly toward the front door. I stood there frozen, trying to remember if it had been there when I left that morning. I knew it hadn't. Beneath it, carved into the wood of the railing, were 3 vertical scratches. Fresh, deep enough to expose pale splinters beneath weathered paint. I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. For the first time, I seriously considered leaving that night. But something about the skull bothered me in a different way than fear. It felt intentional, like whoever left it wanted me to notice, wanted me to understand that they'd been close enough to touch the porch while I was gone. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside made me sit up, listening for movement. Around dawn, I made up my mind to leave. I started packing slowly, folding clothes into my duffel bag while debating whether I was overreacting. But something kept pulling my attention back to the woods behind the cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only seen part of whatever was happening. Before driving away, I convinced myself to take one last walk down the trail. I told myself I needed closure, proof that there was a logical explanation for everything. I carried a flashlight, my phone, and a kitchen knife from the cabin drawer. The trail looked different that morning. Damp, quiet, heavy somehow. When I reached the stone foundation again, I noticed another path hidden behind thick brush near the edge of the clearing. It sloped downward into denser forest. The ground there looked disturbed, with patches of dirt exposed through dead leaves. I followed it carefully. The terrain became rougher, forcing me downhill through tangled roots and loose rock. After several minutes, I heard running water. A narrow creek cut through the bottom of a shallow valley. Across it rose a rocky hillside, partially covered by vines. That's when I noticed the opening. It blended into shadow at first, but once I crossed the creek, I realized it was a narrow cave entrance. The ground outside looked packed down from repeated use. Mud near the opening held multiple footprints pressed deep into the soil. Bare, large. Some looked fresh enough to still hold moisture. The smell hit me before I stepped inside. Rotting organic decay mixed with damp stone. I hesitated near the entrance, shining the flashlight into darkness. The cave narrowed quickly, forcing me to duck beneath low rock. Water dripped somewhere deeper inside. My light moved across the walls and landed on dozens of scratch marks carved into stone. 3 vertical lines repeated over and over, layered so densely that parts of the wall looked shredded. The farther I moved, the stronger the smell became. Then I saw bones. Small piles scattered along the cave floor. Animal remains mostly. Ribs, skull fragments, old vertebrae. Mixed among them were scraps of clothing buried beneath dirt. A faded blue sleeve. A child-sized sneaker half covered in mud. I felt my stomach drop. My first instinct was to turn around, but then I heard movement deeper in the cave. Slow scraping, something shifting against stone. I froze. The sound stopped immediately, like whatever made it knew I was listening. My flashlight shook as I aimed it farther down the tunnel. At first I saw nothing. Then a shape moved just beyond the beam. Tall, thin, standing still in darkness. I couldn't make out details, only the outline of long limbs and shoulders angled strangely. The figure didn't rush me. It simply stood there, motionless, watching. Then I heard breathing, slow and heavy, echoing faintly off stone walls. Panic took over. I backed away too quickly, slipping against loose rock before turning and running. Branches snapped somewhere behind me once I reached the trees. I didn't stop to look back. By the time I stumbled into the clearing near the cabin, my lungs burned and my legs felt weak. I locked myself inside and stared through the windows for nearly an hour. Nothing emerged from the woods, but I couldn't shake one terrifying realization. I had found where it stayed, and if it had been watching me before, now it knew I'd seen it. That final night felt completely different from the others. The cabin no longer felt temporary or unfamiliar. It felt unsafe in a way that was impossible to ignore. I packed everything before dark and left my bags beside the front door so I could leave quickly at sunrise. Rain started just after sunset, heavy enough to drum against the roof and blur the woods beyond the windows. The storm trapped me inside. Lightning flashed occasionally, showing the clearing in brief white bursts before darkness swallowed it again. I sat in the living room with the fireplace poker across my lap, listening to wind push through trees. Around 10, the power went out without warning. The television died. Lights disappeared, and the cabin fell silent except for rain and distant thunder. I lit 2 candles and stayed near the center of the room. That's when I heard footsteps on wet gravel outside. Slow, deliberate, moving toward the porch. My chest tightened instantly. The footsteps stopped near the front door. Several seconds passed. Then came 3 knocks. Calm, evenly spaced. I didn't move. The knocking returned, louder this time. Not aggressive, just patient. I backed away from the door as another sound followed, a scraping noise sliding across the front wall. Something moved around the cabin, dragging against wood. Lightning flashed through the windows, and for a single second, I saw a figure standing near the edge of the clearing, tall and pale against the rain, motionless, watching. The darkness returned before I could focus on details. I stayed frozen in the living room while footsteps circled the cabin again. The porch creaked once beneath heavy weight. Then everything went quiet. The silence lasted long enough that I thought maybe it had left. That's when I heard a voice outside the front door, soft, calm, my own voice. It said my name exactly the way I would say it, every muscle in my body locked. The voice repeated it, closer this time, followed by another 3 knocks. I couldn't breathe normally. Then the doorknob turned slowly. The lock rattled once, then harder. The entire door shook as something leaned against it. I backed into the kitchen and grabbed the knife. The pressure stopped. Silence returned for several seconds before a loud impact slammed into the side of the cabin, hard enough to shake the walls. Another hit followed from the backside. Then glass cracked in the bedroom. I turned just as the rear window shattered inward. Rain blew through the broken frame. For a second, I saw nothing except darkness. Then lightning flashed again. A pale hand gripped the edge of the window frame from outside. Long fingers curled around splintered wood. I didn't wait to see more. I ran straight through the front door into heavy rain and sprinted toward my car. Mud slid beneath my shoes as I fumbled for keys. Behind me, movement crashed through brush near the cabin. I got inside, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. When the headlights illuminated the clearing, I saw it standing near the porch, thin, bare, too tall to look natural. Its posture looked wrong, shoulders hanging unevenly, head tilted slightly. The eyes reflected pale in the headlights. It didn't charge or move closer. It simply watched me. I backed out fast and drove down the mountain without stopping. I never returned. Months later, I searched online for the rental listing. It was gone. The owner's number no longer worked. I tried forgetting the entire experience, but some nights I still wake up to sounds outside my apartment. 3 slow knocks, never loud, never repeated more than once. I always tell myself it's neighbors or pipes or imagination. But every time I hear it, I remember the way that thing stood beside the cabin in the rain, not chasing me, not rushing, just waiting, like it already knew I'd carry it home with me. I'm telling this story on behalf of Samantha Marsh. She sent me this horrifying experience herself, asking me to share it with the world because even now, she's too terrified to tell it publicly. What you're about to hear is disturbing, suspenseful, and something Samantha claims changed her life forever. So, let's start. My name is Samantha Marsh, and I live in apartment 4B of the Cedar Grove complex on Oak Street in Dayton, Ohio. I work as a medical transcriptionist for a local hospital, which means I spend most of my nights alone, listening to dictated medical reports while my cat, Oliver, sleeps at my feet. My life has never been particularly exciting, and I've always preferred it that way. There's comfort in routine, in knowing exactly what each day will bring. I was content with my quiet existence, with my modest apartment and my reliable job, and my small circle of friends. That was before. I should tell you about the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday, October 14th, and I remember it was raining. I remember the sound of the rain against my window, that steady percussion that usually lulled me to sleep. I had finished my shift around 11, stopped at the convenience store for a Diet Coke and a bag of chips, and driven home through streets that glistened under the amber glow of streetlights. Nothing unusual happened on that drive. Nothing unusual happened when I climbed the stairs to my fourth-floor apartment, unlocked my door, fed Oliver, checked my phone, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. I remember thinking how tired I was. I remember the weight of the blankets, the familiar smell of my pillow. I remember closing my eyes and expecting to wake up 7 hours later for my shift. That's all I remember. What I don't remember is how long I slept or why I woke up. One moment I was in the darkness of sleep, and the next I was staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding for no reason I could understand. The rain had stopped. The apartment was silent except for Oliver's gentle breathing from the foot of the bed. My phone showed 3:47 a.m., and my body felt wrong somehow, like I had been running or fighting, like every muscle was tense without my permission. I don't know why I looked under the bed. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the feeling that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone in a way that went beyond Oliver's presence. Maybe it was just the random movement of a mind that couldn't settle. But I rolled over and I shone my phone's flashlight under the frame, and I saw it, a folded piece of paper. I had to reach under there and grab it, pulling it out into the light of my phone. The paper was plain, white, unlined. It looked like it had been torn from a notebook. And when I unfolded it, I read the words that would change everything. You were supposed to be asleep. I stared at those words for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. The handwriting was neat, almost mechanical, in dark blue ink. I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize the paper, and I had no idea what it meant or how it had gotten under my bed while I was sleeping. My first thought was that someone had broken into my apartment. I threw off my blankets and sat up, looking around the room, shining my flashlight in every corner. The windows were locked. The closet door was closed. Nothing seemed out of place. Oliver watched me with sleepy, annoyed eyes, clearly disturbed by my sudden movement. I checked the front door. Locked. The deadbolt was engaged, just as I always left it. I checked every window, every door, every possible point of entry. Nothing. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing was missing. There was no sign that anyone had been in my apartment, except for that single piece of paper under my bed. I called the police. They came, took a report, looked around, told me that sometimes people get confused, that sometimes they walk in their sleep, that sometimes pranks get out of hand. They seemed more annoyed than concerned. One officer suggested I might have written it myself without remembering. I wanted to believe he was wrong, but I couldn't prove anything. There were no fingerprints on the paper. There was no evidence of forced entry. There was just the note and my certainty that I had not written it. After they left, I sat on my couch for 2 hours, watching the door, watching the windows, watching the shadows in my apartment move in ways that weren't real. Oliver sat with me, his warmth against my leg somehow both comforting and insufficient. I didn't sleep again that night. I should have gone to work the next day, but I couldn't. I called in sick, told them I had a stomach bug, and spent the morning changing the locks on my door. The new deadbolt made me feel slightly better, but only slightly. I also bought new window locks, checked every room for hidden cameras or microphones, and searched my apartment with the obsessive thoroughness of someone who has just discovered their sense of safety has been violated. I found nothing. I found nothing, and that made it worse. Because if there was no evidence, then maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I had written the note myself during some fugue state, some episode of which I had no memory. I scheduled an appointment with my doctor for the following week, convinced that something was neurologically wrong with me. But in the meantime, I had to keep living. I had to keep working. I had to keep pretending that everything was normal when I no longer felt safe in my own home. For 3 days, nothing happened. I slept with all the lights on, my phone within reach, a knife under my pillow that I would never have considered keeping before. I barely slept at all, drifting in and out of a state that wasn't quite rest, wasn't quite awareness. Every small sound made me bolt upright, scanning the darkness, waiting for something to emerge from the shadows. On the 4th night, I heard it. It was around 2 in the morning. I had finally managed to fall into a shallow, restless sleep when a sound dragged me back to consciousness. It was soft, barely audible over Oliver's breathing. A whisper. Someone was whispering in my apartment. I lay completely still, not breathing, not moving, straining to hear. The sound was coming from the hallway, just outside my bedroom door. It was a voice, low and steady, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. It might have been coming from my kitchen. It might have been coming from the living room. It might have been coming from right outside my door. I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty was somehow worse than knowing. I reached for my phone, for the knife, for anything that might help me. But before I could move, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound had been, pressing against me like a physical weight. Then Oliver screamed. I've never heard a cat make a sound like that before. It was a scream of pure terror, a sound that broke through the silence like shattered glass. Oliver tore off the bed and ran, disappearing under it, pressed against the wall, his eyes huge and reflecting my phone's flashlight. And then, just as suddenly, he went silent. He just stopped making any sound at all. I got out of bed. I had no choice. The terror in Oliver's eyes, the sudden silence, the whispering that had already stopped, all of it combined to push me into action. I grabbed the knife and the flashlight and moved toward the hallway. Every step felt like it took forever, like the distance between my bedroom and the hallway was stretching, elongating. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I reached the hallway and turned on the light. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. Every room in my apartment was exactly as I had left it, with no sign of intrusion, no sign of presence, no sign that anything had been wrong. But Oliver was still under my bed, silent and trembling. And when I looked at the floor, right at the entrance to the hallway, I saw it. Another note. I picked it up with shaking hands, unfolded it with the same careful precision as before. The handwriting was identical, the paper identical, the blue ink identical. And the message was different, but somehow worse. You were supposed to be asleep. Why do you keep waking up? I stopped sleeping. I know how that sounds, and believe me, I understand how unhealthy it was, how dangerous. But every time I closed my eyes, I thought about those notes, about the whispering, about Oliver's scream. I thought about someone standing in my apartment, speaking words I couldn't understand, watching me sleep, leaving messages that seemed to know I would find them. By the 5th day, I was hallucinating. I would see movement in my peripheral vision, figures standing in corners that vanished when I looked at them directly. I would hear my name whispered in empty rooms. I would feel breath on the back of my neck while I sat alone at my kitchen table. And when I spun around, there was nothing, never anything, only the empty space where something should have been. My boss called, my friends called, my mother called. I told them all that I was sick, that I would be back soon, that everything was fine. But nothing was fine. I was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. On the 6th day, I saw myself. I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at the stranger who looked back at me. My eyes were sunken, circled with dark shadows. My skin had taken on a grayish cast. I looked like I hadn't slept in days, and I hadn't, not really. But as I stood there, trying to find some hint of myself in my own reflection, I noticed something wrong. The reflection wasn't moving the way I was. I raised my hand slowly, watching the mirror. My reflection raised its hand, but there was a delay, a fraction of a second that shouldn't have been there. I waved slowly, watching. The reflection waved back, but the gesture was wrong somehow, too fluid, too graceful, like someone was mimicking me from inside the glass. I stepped back, my breath catching. The reflection didn't step back, it stepped forward. I watched, paralyzed, as my reflection moved toward the edge of the mirror, as if trying to climb out, as if trying to break through the barrier that separated us. I could see the wrongness in its face now, the slight distortion in its features. The way its smile didn't match my own. And then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a voice that sounded exactly like mine, but wasn't, it spoke. You were supposed to be asleep. I ran. I grabbed Oliver and I ran out the front door, down the stairs, out into the night where the rain had started again. I sat on the concrete steps of my building for 2 hours, holding my cat, staring at nothing, waiting for the world to start making sense again. When I finally went back inside, the bathroom mirror was shattered. The glass had broken outward, and there were no cracks, no impact point, no reasonable explanation. It looked like something had pushed through from the other side. And on the floor, in the glass, in that spreading pool of water from the broken pipe under the sink, another note: you weren't supposed to see. I called my mother the next morning. I couldn't be alone anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay when I was clearly losing my mind. She drove 3 hours to get to me, and when she arrived, she took one look at my face and called my doctor herself, making an appointment for that afternoon. I told her about the notes. I told her about the whispering, the screaming, the reflection. I told her everything, fully expecting her to have me committed. But instead, she held my hand and told me I was going to be okay, that we would figure this out, that I wasn't alone. That night, while my mother slept in my guest room, I had the worst episode yet. I woke up around 3 in the morning, and I wasn't in my bed anymore. I was standing in the middle of my living room, facing my front door. In my hand, I was holding a piece of paper and a pen, and I didn't remember getting out of bed, didn't remember walking to the living room, didn't remember taking out the pen and paper. But I knew what I had been doing. I could feel it in my bones, in my muscles, in the way my hand ached from writing. I had been writing notes to myself, notes that I would find later, notes that would convince me I was being stalked, notes that would break me down until I was ready. And now, in my hand, I had the next note. You were supposed to be asleep, but you weren't supposed to remember. Now you remember. Now you know. I dropped the note like it was burning me. My mother came running from the guest room, alerted by some instinct, some sound I must have made. And when I told her what had happened, when I showed her the note, she didn't call the police this time. She didn't call a doctor. She cried. She sat down on my couch and held the note, and she cried. And when I asked her what was wrong, she told me a story I had never heard before. A story about her sister, my Aunt Caroline. A story about a house in rural Ohio, about a girl who couldn't sleep, about notes that appeared under beds, about whispers in hallways, about reflections that moved on their own. They called it hereditary insomnia, my mother said, her voice shaking. But that's not what it was. It was something else, something that runs in our family, something that takes people when they don't sleep. What happens? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. What happens to them? You go somewhere else, somewhere between sleep and waking. And if you stay there too long, you can't get back. You become something else, something that walks and talks and looks like you, but isn't. Something that writes notes, that whispers, that breaks through mirrors. My mother looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was fear, but it was also grief. It was the face of someone who had been running from something for decades, who had been waiting for it to catch up. Caroline never woke up, she said. She went to sleep one night and never came back. And the thing that was wearing her face, they had to put it in a home. It's still alive. It still walks around. But it isn't Caroline. I felt cold wash over me. But I wake up. I always wake up. Until you don't. My mother grabbed my hand, her grip almost painful. You have to sleep, Samantha. You have to sleep naturally, at the right times, in the right way. If you don't, if you fight it, if you refuse it, if you stay awake too long, it finds a way in. It takes over while you're between places. But how do I stop it? My mother's grip tightened. You can't stop it. You can only stay ahead of it. Sleep when you're supposed to sleep. Wake when you're supposed to wake. Don't let yourself drift. Don't let yourself linger in that space between. It's already here, Samantha. It's already been watching you. You just gave it the chance to learn. I stopped fighting sleep after that. My mother stayed with me for 2 weeks, helping me establish a routine, making sure I slept at the right times, that I never lingered in those gray spaces between consciousness and dreams. She taught me the tricks our family had learned over generations, the ways of forcing yourself back when you felt yourself drifting. For a while, it worked. I slept when I was supposed to, woke when I was supposed to, and nothing else happened. The notes stopped appearing. The whispering stopped. The mirror stayed whole. Oliver came out from under the bed, and my life slowly began to return to normal. My mother went back to her own life, and I went back to mine. I returned to work, started sleeping normally again, and for a few beautiful weeks, I thought I was free. I thought I had won, but I hadn't. I just didn't know it yet. It was exactly 30 days after my mother left. I had been sleeping well, dreaming normally, waking refreshed. I had almost forgotten about the notes, about the whispers, about the thing in the mirror. I had almost convinced myself it was all some kind of breakdown, some stress-induced hallucination that my brain had finally let go. And then, on the 31st night, I fell asleep at the wrong time. I had been watching a movie, a dumb comedy I had seen before. I had planned to stay up until 11, finish the movie, then go to bed at my usual time. But the movie was boring, and I was tired, and I let myself drift off on the couch, my head resting against the armrest, Oliver curled up beside me. I fell asleep in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and I knew the moment it happened that I had made a terrible mistake. I couldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes. I was trapped in that gray space my mother had warned me about. The space between sleep and waking, where things could reach through and pull you in. I could feel something in the room with me, something standing right beside the couch, just inches away. And I could feel it breathing. I fought. God, how I fought. I forced every ounce of will into trying to move, to wake up, to escape. But it was like pushing against a wall that wouldn't move, like trying to swim through cement. The gray space was pulling me deeper, and I was losing. "You're here," a voice whispered in my head. "You're finally here. I've been waiting for you." No, I tried to scream, but I had no voice, no body, nothing but my thoughts rattling against the walls of my own mind. "No, I want to go back." "You can't go back," the voice said, and I could feel it smiling, feel its satisfaction, its patience rewarded. "You stayed awake too long, and now you're here. You let me in, and now you have to let me take over." Who are you? I thought, though I already knew. I already knew what it was, what it wanted. "I'm what happens when you don't sleep," the voice said. "I'm what lives in the space between. I've been practicing on you for weeks. I know how you think, how you move, how you breathe. I know your name and your address and your favorite foods. I know everything about you because I've been watching you sleep. No. And now I'm going to be you." I felt it moving closer, felt it pressing against the boundaries of my consciousness, ready to break through. I could feel it pulling me deeper into that gray space, taking pieces of me, replacing them with itself. It was taking my memories, my habits, my thoughts. It was becoming me, piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And then I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Samantha!" The voice was distant, muffled, like it was coming through water. But it was real. It was actually there. "Samantha, wake up!" I forced my eyes open. The gray space shattered around me, and I was back in my living room, gasping, shaking, alive. My mother was standing over me, her face pale with terror. "I felt something wrong," she said. "I don't know how, but I knew. I drove through the night to get here. You have to wake up all the way, Samantha. You have to stay awake." But I couldn't. I was too tired, too worn, too far gone. The thing that had been trying to take me was still there, still pressing, still waiting for me to slip back into that gray space where it was strongest. "It's too late," I said, and I could hear myself crying. "It already has enough of me. It's already learned how to be me." My mother's face twisted with grief and determination. She grabbed my shoulders and shook me hard, forcing my eyes to meet hers. "Then we do what my mother did with Caroline," she said. "We lock it in. You have to lock it in, Samantha. It's inside you now, but it hasn't finished yet. You can still trap it, still contain it, but you have to do it now, while you have enough of yourself left to make it listen." "How?" I was crying, shaking, barely able to think. "How do I lock it in?" "Find the space. Find the gray place inside your own mind where it's hiding. And then close the door. Lock it in a room that only you have the key to. Make it so small, so contained, that it can never get out." I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if anything would work, but I had no other choice. So I closed my eyes and reached into myself, down through the layers of my consciousness, past my memories and my thoughts, down to the place where the thing was hiding. I found it. It was curled up in the center of me, a dark, cold mass of wrongness that was still trying to eat its way through my mind. I could feel it fighting, trying to resist, trying to push back against what I was doing. but I was still me. I still had enough left to do what needed to be done. I built walls around it, thick, strong walls made of everything that made me who I am. My memories of rain and sunshine, of birthday parties and first dates, of my mother's face and Oliver's purr and the taste of chocolate. I locked it in a room inside my own mind, a room with no doors and no windows, a room that would hold it forever. And when it was done, I opened my eyes and I was still me, still Samantha, still here. My mother was holding me, crying, whispering thanks over and over. I was exhausted, completely drained, like I had run a marathon and then run it again. But I was still me. The thing was still locked inside me, trapped in its room, but I was still me. That was 3 months ago. I still have the notes. I keep them in a box under my bed, reminders of what happened, of what almost happened. I sleep on a strict schedule now, never deviating, never staying up too late or waking too early. I don't watch movies past my bedtime. I don't let myself get too tired. I don't give the thing any chances, but it's still there. I feel it sometimes, pressing against the walls of its prison, testing its limits. And sometimes, in the gray space between sleep and waking, I hear it whispering, "I'm still here." And I'm so patient. Sooner or later, you'll slip. You'll sleep in the wrong place, at the wrong time. You'll give me just one more chance. And when you do, I'll be ready. I'm always ready. I'm always waiting. You were supposed to be asleep. Now I am. My name is Daniel Harris, and what I'm describing didn't begin like anything you'd expect a nightmare to start with. There was no dramatic event, no sudden shift in reality, no moment where I could clearly point and say, "That's when things broke." It started instead in the most ordinary version of life I had ever known. I was living outside Portland, Oregon, in a quiet suburban house with my wife, Erin, and our 5-year-old daughter, Lila. I worked remotely in IT support, which meant most of my days were spent inside the same 4 walls, answering tickets, restarting systems, and listening to the low hum of electronics that eventually blended into background silence. Erin worked part-time at a dental clinic, and Lila spent her days in a world that seemed half real and half private. She wasn't a troubled child. If anything, she was too self-contained. She would sit for hours with her toys arranged in careful patterns, talking softly to them as if they were part of conversations we weren't allowed to hear. We assumed it was imagination, normal developmental behavior. But around the time she turned 5, she started mentioning someone named Milo. At first, it sounded harmless. "He was under her bed," she said. "He didn't like bright light. He only talked when she wasn't looking directly at him." Erin laughed it off as an imaginary friend phase. And I tried to do the same, because that's what parents are supposed to do. But the way Lila described him didn't feel like invention. It felt like acknowledgement, like she was describing something already present in her environment. Something she had simply become aware of before we had. The first disruption to that sense of normality came from something so simple, I almost ignored it entirely. Erin had taken Lila outside one afternoon to play in the backyard. It was a calm day, one of those soft Oregon afternoons where the light filters through trees and everything feels slightly muted, like the world is being viewed through a thin layer of glass. Lila was blowing bubbles, laughing in a way that made the moment feel completely safe. Later that evening, Erin showed me the photos on her phone. At first glance, everything looked normal. Lila centered in frame, bubbles suspended mid-air, sunlight catching in drifting motion. But in the background, near the edge of the yard, where an old oak tree stood, there was something that didn't belong. I assumed it was a shadow or motion blur at first, something caused by wind or camera focus. But when I zoomed in, the shape refused to behave like anything natural. It wasn't just darkness, it had structure. Too tall, too thin, its proportions subtly incorrect in a way that made my eyes uncomfortable. The longer I looked at it, the more it felt less like an object in the environment and more like something that had chosen its position behind her. Aaron suggested it might be a camera glitch, and I agreed out loud, but neither of us deleted the photo. We kept looking at it longer than we should have, each of us quietly trying to decide if the other had noticed what we didn't want to say. After that photo, I made a conscious effort to treat everything as normal again. I told myself that if you give attention to something vague, your mind will start shaping patterns where none exist. That was the logic I relied on as I went back to work, fixed small things around the house, and tried to ignore the slight unease that had settled into the background of daily life. But Lila didn't let things stay abstract. Her references to Milo became more frequent and more specific in ways that began overlapping uncomfortably with real features of our home. One evening at dinner, she mentioned that Milo didn't like the hallway light because it made a buzzing sound inside his head. I remember pausing mid-motion because that detail hit too close to something I had already been ignoring for weeks. The hallway light flickered intermittently and produced a faint electrical hum that I had planned to fix but never prioritized. It wasn't broken enough to demand immediate attention, just annoying enough to live with. But hearing Lila describe it so precisely created a kind of cognitive dissonance I couldn't resolve. It wasn't that her statement was impossible. It was that it was accurate in a way she shouldn't have been able to verify on her own. Erin dismissed it as coincidence, but I noticed she stopped lingering in the hallway afterward, even though she never said why. The first undeniable physical interruption came later that week, at around 2 a.m. I woke up to a faint tapping sound somewhere in the house. At first I assumed it was plumbing, or maybe the house settling, something mechanical and explainable. But as I lay there, the rhythm didn't match anything structural. It wasn't consistent, like pipes or wind pressure. It felt irregular, almost responsive, like something was testing surfaces rather than producing noise. I got up quietly and followed it into the hallway. The air felt noticeably different there, colder and heavier, like stepping into a space that wasn't fully connected to the rest of the house's temperature. The tapping stopped as soon as I focused on it directly, which made it worse rather than better. Lila's door was slightly open, and I remember standing there longer than I should have before going inside. She was asleep, breathing normally, but something made me check under her bed anyway. At first glance, it looked empty. Just storage bins, scattered toys, and shadowed floor space. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed a shape pressed into the far corner where the bed frame met the wall. It wasn't moving, but it didn't feel lifeless either. It felt aware in a way that suggested stillness was intentional rather than natural. I closed the door quietly, went back to bed, and didn't tell Erin. But I didn't sleep either. Because once you notice something occupying space where nothing should fit, it becomes very hard to convince yourself that space is empty again. After that night, I stopped treating anything as isolated coincidence. The house didn't suddenly become different. It became increasingly inconsistent in small ways that were easy to dismiss individually, but impossible to ignore collectively. Lila's behavior stayed calm, almost unaffected, but her references to Milo became more structured, like she was describing rules rather than stories. She stopped saying things like, "He is under my bed," and started saying things like, "He doesn't stay in one place when you look too long." That shift mattered more than I wanted it to, because it suggested awareness of observation rather than imagination. Around the same time, Erin's photos began showing inconsistencies I couldn't explain away with lighting or angles. The shape behind Lila no longer stayed in fixed positions. It appeared slightly closer in some frames, slightly rotated in others, like it was adapting between exposures. I started deleting photos quietly, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I didn't want repeated visual confirmation of something that didn't behave like a static object. The problem was that even after deleting them, I could still recall details too clearly. Angles, spacing, silhouette proportions, like my memory was becoming another storage system for something I didn't want to carry. It made me question whether observation was necessary for persistence, or whether noticing something once was enough to keep it anchored in perception. The security cameras were supposed to end ambiguity. I installed them throughout the house, hallway, living room, and Lila's bedroom, telling myself that recorded evidence would either confirm normalcy or expose malfunction in perception. The first 2 nights were uneventful, which gave me a temporary sense of relief I didn't fully trust. But on the 3rd night, I checked the footage again at around 2 a.m., mostly out of habit rather than expectation. At first, everything appeared stable. Lila was asleep, the hallway empty, the house behaving exactly as it should. Then at 2:11 a.m., she got out of bed and walked to the corner of her room. She didn't look around or hesitate. She simply stood there, facing the wall, completely still, as if responding to something outside camera range. That's when the image began to distort, not digitally at first, but spatially. The air behind her seemed to compress subtly, like depth was being reduced. Then Milo appeared, not entering the frame, not moving into view, but becoming visible as if the camera had finally adjusted its interpretation of what was already there. Lila turned toward him and smiled. That detail stayed with me more than anything else, the familiarity in her reaction. On replay, I noticed something worse. Milo wasn't simply observing her. He was aligning himself with her position, adjusting his presence relative to her movement patterns, as if studying the mechanics of proximity in a physical world. He was still learning how to stabilize within. After reviewing the footage, I didn't feel panic in the immediate sense. What I felt instead was a growing awareness that the situation wasn't escalating randomly. It was following consistency. Patterns were forming, not in behavior alone, but in how presence itself seemed to stabilize over time. Erin noticed my behavior changing before I could explain it to her. I was checking corners more often, replaying camera footage repeatedly, and reacting to small household sounds with delayed attention, as if expecting them to mean something. Lila, however, remained calm in a way that no longer felt comforting. She wasn't reacting less. She was reacting appropriately, as if she already understood the system we were still trying to interpret. She stopped describing Milo in narrative terms and started referencing him as if he had continuity beyond observation. One morning she mentioned he was learning how to stay longer. That phrase stuck with me because it implied development, not existence. Around the same time, physical signs began appearing in the house that didn't match any normal explanation. Scratches along the hallway wall near her room became more defined, thin, vertical, and evenly spaced, too precise to be accidental damage. Erin suggested it could be Lila dragging objects or playing roughly, but the marks didn't match any known pattern of child behavior or physical force application. When I pressed my hand against them, they felt shallow but deliberate, like repeated tracing over the same path rather than single impact damage. The deeper shift wasn't visual anymore, it was environmental. The house began reacting differently depending on attention. When I focused on specific areas, nothing unusual would occur, but when I stopped actively observing, inconsistencies would accumulate in those same spaces. The hallway light, for example, stopped flickering when I inspected it directly, but resumed its irregular buzzing pattern whenever I turned away. It created a sense that observation itself was influencing stability rather than documenting it. That idea became harder to dismiss when I realized even sound behaved inconsistently depending on awareness. Footsteps, taps, or subtle creaks would either align with expectation or disappear entirely depending on whether I anticipated them. It made me start doubting not just what I was seeing, but what I was capable of confirming as real. One night, I stood in the hallway for nearly 10 minutes without moving, just listening. Nothing happened. But when I finally turned to leave, I noticed something new on the wall near Lila's door. Another set of faint marks, identical in spacing, but slightly deeper than before. It felt less like intrusion and more like repetition, as if something was practicing permanence in the same location until it no longer required effort to remain there. By the time we brought in outside help, the situation had already moved beyond anything explainable through medical or psychological frameworks. We consulted pediatric specialists, therapists, even a visiting priest at Aaron's insistence, but every evaluation returned normal results. Lila showed no signs of distress, hallucination, or behavioral disorder. That made everything worse rather than better, because it removed the possibility of categorizing the experience as illness. One night, we heard her speaking softly in her room after we had already put her to bed. At first, I assumed she was talking in her sleep, but then I heard a second voice responding. It was lower, controlled, and unnaturally steady, as if each word was measured before release. When I opened the door, Lila was sitting upright on her bed, fully awake, while something stood in the corner of her room. It was no longer trying to conceal itself. Its presence felt established, like it had reached a point where concealment was no longer necessary for continuity. The air in the room felt compressed, as though spatial depth had been reduced to accommodate it. Aaron froze beside me, unable to speak, and for the first time, I understood that fear wasn't coming from surprise anymore. It was coming from recognition of something that had already integrated itself into our environment. It spoke without visible articulation, and the sound filled the room in a way that made direction meaningless. The voice said Lila had done well, and she responded calmly, as if receiving confirmation rather than instruction. Then she said something that stayed with me more than anything else. She didn't need to see Milo the same way anymore. Not because he was leaving, but because visibility was no longer required for presence. That distinction felt fundamentally wrong in a way I still struggled to describe. The lights in the room flickered, then dimmed, and in that brief loss of illumination, I felt movement without sound, like something adjusting position without interacting with physical space in a normal way. I didn't see it move. I only registered that it had moved when I realized the distance between where it had been and where it now felt closest to me had changed. The last clear moment I remember is a sensation near my ear, not auditory, but cognitive, like an idea being placed directly into awareness rather than spoken aloud. It communicated that it had learned how to remain without requiring attention. After that night, nothing in the house changed visibly again, but nothing in it ever returned to being unoccupied either.